We are only 76 days away from the 2025 college football season kicking off in Dublin, Ireland, between Kansas State and Iowa State. And to kick off the month of June, ESPN released their FPI ratings for the 2025 season, and I want to review them today. I'm going to bring up some graphics on the screen for you to look at, specifically in relationship to the top 30 teams according to FPI, their playoff chances, their predicted wins and losses, and their rating on a neutral field, all compared to each other in the average college football team. So a lot of data I'm going to be presenting to you from this Football Power Index, and I'm going to give you some thoughts on it, things I like, things I don't like, and trying to explain why it releases these wonky ratings every preseason. So if you haven't already, just please do these few things for me. They're all free. They don't sign you up for anything fishy. It's just clicking that big red subscribe button, hitting the notification bell, and also liking the video to help us get into the algorithm and grow our channel to my goal of one day reaching 100,000 or more subscribers. I genuinely believe that we can do that. Check out my Patreon page and merchandise store via the links in the description if you want to purchase any goods and services that I have to offer or just support the channel. Join our Discord server via the link in the description. And also comment down below your thoughts on ESPN's FPI, who you think is overrated, underrated, etc. So thank you for doing those things. I really appreciate them, and let's get down to it. So I'm just going to get right into the data. I'm going to pull up these rankings, ratings, whatever you want to call them here on the right-hand side of the screen. And in these columns here, the leftmost column, you see teams number 1 through 15, their FPI rating, which is how much better are they than the average college football team on a neutral field. Their record is to the left of that. Their name and placement, obviously, is, well, to the left of their rating. Their record prediction from FPI is to the right of their rating, correction. And then on the rightmost column, you see teams 16 through 30. Just want to lay it out to everyone, just in case maybe you're not watching on your screen. It's important that you do so, but I'm going to go through teams 1 through 30 and also toward the end of the video point out some teams outside of the top 30. Some notable teams. There are some notable teams where they're outside the top 30, and I think to myself, maybe from the metrics ESPN's FPI uses that makes sense, such as recruiting, specifically ESPN's recruiting. They don't use a composite. So ESPN's recruiting ratings mean a lot. A lot, a lot, a lot. It's the reason why, before I even told you, Georgia and Alabama are ranked ahead of Ohio State, despite the fact that Georgia returns about the same as Ohio State does, and Ohio State was the way better team last year and starts the higher-rated QB. Alabama is ranked ahead of Ohio State, even though they didn't even make the playoffs and did not look good at the end of the year while Ohio State was playing their best football. Just as an example, I especially point that out because I didn't pick Ohio State to win it all last year until basically the end when it was obvious. And I am not picking them to win it all again this season. So it would probably surprise many of you and many who know this channel when I say that I think Ohio State is like once again being underrated by ESPN. It's a very common thing. There are many reasons to not view Ohio State or really any team this year or last year as the national champion because the talent among the top 15 or 10 teams is more spread out. It's not an exclusive club of 1, 2, or 3, or occasionally 4 teams every year like it was in the late 2010s. Talent's still pretty exclusive, but more spread out among maybe 10 or 15 teams or more than that, but really 10 or 15 in terms of national championship chances, some years even less. However, if you are going to rank Ohio State ahead of Penn State, Oregon, Notre Dame, Miami, Clemson, and ESPN does, I don't precisely understand why you would rank them then behind Alabama. I don't get it. But again, that's something I disagree with, and that's just an example of something. We still have a lot to get to in this video. So at number 1, we have Texas, or ESPN has Texas. I say we as if I'm ESPN. Texas, I think, in this instance, is probably a tad bit overrated just because they're about 2 points better than the next team neutral field, over 4 points better than the third best team neutral field, and then ESPN's FPI is telling you here that they think Texas will beat Ohio State because home field advantage is about 3 points, give or take. If it was a night game for Ohio State, maybe you could argue more, but it's a noon game, so 3 points towards Ohio State, and that matchup's fair. Texas's FPI is a 28.5 rating. Ohio State's is a 23.8. That is a 4.7 point advantage for Texas, so they'd be predicted to win by just under a field goal by FPI, essentially. Their projected win-loss record, by the way, is among the best in America, predicted to earn 10.4 wins and 2.1 losses, and they're given a 34.1% chance to win their conference. Winning conferences is important, but it's also, as we saw last year, hit or miss, where at the end of the day, Penn State and Texas, who were better in power ratings than their conference championship game opponents, Oregon and Georgia, lost those. A lot of people thought Iowa State was better than Arizona State, and SMU was power rated higher than Clemson. It's not quite like the playoffs where you get longer times to prepare, and therefore the better team can further maximize their advantage. In conference championship games, you typically get 1 week to prepare, and you didn't even anticipate that team exactly being there, or at least know that they were going there, especially in super conferences where you don't have divisions anymore, and therefore the best of the best are going to go, not just the best of a division, which... Anyway, that's probably a topic for a different video, but I think you all understand what I'm saying. Back then, as recently as 2023, Georgia by early November was known as a lock to win the SEC East because it was a weaker division. The SEC West was a little bit more chaotic because it was stronger in most years, although with Nick Saban, they essentially won it every year or close to every year when he was there. Still very competitive. That's why he didn't win it every year, but almost every year. The Big Ten West, the only reason that wasn't solved every year is there was no strong team in the West. Some years, when Paul Chryst was there and fielded good teams, it was solved very early because Wisconsin was the dominant player. And then in the Big Ten East, even when Ohio State was really good, and they still are, but when I mean was really good, I mean clearly better than everyone else in the Big Ten, even within their own division. It wasn't like now where Ohio State is the best program in the Big Ten, but Oregon, Penn State could go to their level, and Michigan briefly from 21 to 23 was better than them. We're talking about 2010's Big Ten, where, again, they were really the only team who was up and playing at an elite level in that conference. There were times where it wasn't solved until Ohio State played Michigan, or until the week prior that, where Ohio State hosted Michigan State in 15, lost to them, Spartans went to Indy. Or they played Penn State in the second to last regular season week in 19, and by beating Penn State, punched their ticket to Indy. So now with these new schedules, you typically don't figure out who's going to your conference championship games until the second to last or last week of November. So anyway, all to say, that's why I don't really have the conference odds up here, is they're not going to be nearly as relevant as the wins, losses, national championship, and also playoff odds, which is what I want to focus on in the other half of this video. But again, Texas ranked first per FPI with a 28.5 football power index rating. Georgia is second with a 26.6 FPI rating, predicted 10.1 wins, 2.3 losses. Alabama's at third with a 24.2 FPI rating, predicted 9.6 wins, 2.8 losses. Very fascinating, again, to see Alabama ahead of Ohio State. I know that Alabama and Georgia have the most talented rosters, the top two, per prior recruiting ratings. Like when the team talent composite comes out from 24/7 Sports, Georgia and Alabama will probably be the top two teams in that recruiting rankings, roster rankings segment. However, Ohio State's outperformed Alabama the previous 2 years, and it wasn't particularly close. 2023 Ohio State by metrics was far better than 23 Alabama, and it was the same for 24 Ohio State compared to 24 Alabama. Even more so, because 24 Ohio State was better than 23 Ohio State, and 24 Alabama, I think, was about the same or worse than 23 Alabama. And certainly at the end of the year, they were worse. I don't think Georgia at number 2 is overrated. I'm higher on Georgia than a lot of people are. I think giving them a rating of 26.6 and having them as about a field goal better than Ohio State or that much better than Penn State or Oregon, closer to a touchdown there, that may have them overrated, but their placement and the fact that they're among the Texases, Alabamas, Ohio States, that doesn't bother me because they recruit at that high level. I think Kirby Smart is by far the best tactician as a head coach in college football, and I think he's the number one head coach overall. So I have no problem with Georgia being at 2. Ohio State at 4th, 23.8 FPI, 10.4 predicted wins, 2.2 predicted losses. I have no problem with them being at 4th. I just have a problem with them being power rated that much lower than Georgia, who I think has a lot of equal roster questions as them. And then I have a problem with them being power rated below Alabama, if I'm being honest. If Ohio State and Alabama played tomorrow, I would pick Ohio State to decisively win. I think Ohio State's staff is better. I think their roster is better. And I think they have the 2 best players in all of college football that no one on Alabama measures up to right now. Penn State at 5th with a 21.5 FPI rating, predicted 10.2 wins, 2.2 losses. I think Penn State's highly undervalued here. I think this is a very similar situation to Michigan in 2023 in the preseason, where per FPI they were ranked outside the top 5 in the preseason. At the end of the year, they were number 1. And per ESPN's efficiency ratings, which don't really take into account priors, just how you play the games, Michigan was number 1 by a mile. That's kind of what I'm thinking about with Penn State here. The only reason Penn State isn't ranked lower, despite the fact that they recruit similarly to that 2023 Michigan team, is the field has become weaker than it was in 2023 or years prior. Every additional year of NIL in the portal means that all the top talent isn't collecting with Ohio State, Alabama, and Georgia anymore. Some of that talent is spreading, a lot of it, to Texas and Oregon, some to Notre Dame, some with A&M and Miami. You get my point. I mean, Clemson recruiting has almost been completely torn down, although they're rebuilding it back up to that top 10, top 5 standard, in part because of the changes that have occurred within the sport, not even mentioning the most recent House settlement, which I don't think will restrict NIL and paying players absurd amounts as much as people want it to, but it's an attempt, and eventually I think we will get to a point in college football where there is new order. Oregon at 6th with a 20.5 power rating, 10 predicted wins, 2.4 predicted losses. I'd say this is pretty accurate, but I also don't think they're nearly a touchdown worse than Georgia. Better QB situation, better O-line situation, defensively obviously much worse. You look at Notre Dame at 7th, 18.1 FPI, 9.3 predicted wins, 2.7 predicted losses. I would have Notre Dame maybe placed lower than this in my own ratings, but I'm not going to complain about it. I think that the 9-3, 10-2 most likely record is spot on, and I think their FPI rating is spot on. It also tracks with the metrics that ESPN uses, which are recruiting and past success and quarterback. Notre Dame has C.J. Carr, highly talented quarterback out of high school. Their recruiting roster is probably top 10 now after Freeman has stacked impressive classes. I'll see what the team talent composite says in August when 24/7 Sports releases that. And they've had pretty good past success. I mean, they went to the national championship game last year after losing to Northern Illinois. A&M at 8 with a 17.9 FPI rating, 8.1 predicted wins, 4.1 predicted losses. I don't know what to tell you. It could be too high, but they also have a lot of talent, and they return over 70% of their production. And last year, they had some success for sure. At number 9, we have Miami with a 17.5 FPI rating, 9.7 predicted wins, 2.8 predicted losses. Totally fine with that. Clemson at 11th with a similar FPI rating, similar win losses, 9.7 wins, 2.9 losses. I think Clemson should be top 10, especially with how much talent they have. They're still going to have a top 8 talent roster. And with what they have returning and the QB they have in Klubnik, I don't see why they're behind Tennessee at 10. With a 17.4 FPI rating, 8.7 wins, 3.4 losses. It feels like the computers didn't take Nico Imaliava out. It feels like they forgot to take him out. And FPI will probably update this sometime before kickoff, so I'm curious to see what happens after the updates. I just went through the top 10 there. I think those are the best teams to go through because most teams outside of that top 11, like I think Clemson should be top 10 and they have really good chances to win it all. And certainly I think will make the playoffs. Outside of Clemson at 11, I don't see many other teams up here who have greater than a 1% chance to win it all. I'm not buying LSU this year. When I look at USC, I'm buying USC. I am. But I don't think USC has great odds to win it all. I just think they'll win a lot of games. Michigan, I think, if Underwood is the freak and Vince Young that everyone says he is with that defense, they probably have a 0.5 to 1% chance to win it all. But again, it's 1%. I mean, they're not better than Ohio State, Penn State, Oregon. May not even be better than USC or another team that we'll talk about later who was actually left out of the top 30, who I think is very underrated. Oklahoma, if everything pans out, I mean, maybe they have a 1% chance to win it all. South Carolina, if they reload, they could. LSU, I think also, I mentioned that I'm not buying them, but they could as well. And then from there, Florida, if DJ Lagway is Cam Newton and Napier's culture and roster building can compensate for his game management, maybe they have a shot too. A lot of these teams outside the top 11 from FPI, I think, have a very high ceiling, but because of either recruiting limitations for past success, lower returning production, they're not very high. So LSU's at 12th, Ole Miss 13th, Auburn 14th, South Carolina 15th, Oklahoma 16th, Michigan 17th, Florida 18th, USC 19th, SMU 20th, Kansas State 21st, Arkansas 22nd, Missouri 23rd, Arizona State 24th, Nebraska making an appearance at 25th, Virginia Tech at 26th. I have no idea why they're there. I know I brushed over Arkansas, but given this is all about SEC recruiting rankings, because the SEC gets the most talent, ESPN probably has a slight SEC bias in the same way that Fox might with the Big Ten, let's say, and let's just be honest about that. I'm not nearly as surprised that Arkansas was in the top 25 as I was that Virginia Tech was in the top 30. Washington at 27th, Georgia Tech at 28th. I really like that one. BYU at 29th. And it's so interesting that Kansas has been ranked pretty high by FPI in these last two preseasons. And I think it's because Lance Leipold, what he's done is he's gone to these Power 4 programs, specifically in the Big Ten and SEC, and he's gotten some of their talented backups that either haven't worked out or want playing time, and he just takes them in. So I think their high school talent profile has been probably rapidly climbing from ESPN's perspective. Then again, that also could be faulty because maybe some of those players that were ranked high out of high school were misevaluated. Again, I don't know exactly how the specific details of what FPI does or how it works. I know what FPI does. It's meant to predict who the best teams are right now, to predict games, and it's just meant to make predictions without human input. That's what it's meant to do, based on in-game performance, recruiting rankings, and past success. But I don't know the granular details of what goes in. Like, I don't know the weights for recruiting or how much more they value a quarterback who's a 5-star than a D tackle who's a 5-star, for example. I don't know those things. So I'm making a guess as to why some of these teams are higher than others. For Virginia Tech, I just have absolutely no idea why they're ranked that high. I don't. That seems like something where, again, the people at ESPN forgot to include that Virginia Tech got pillaged in the transfer portal. So looking at really teams 12 through 30, I would say that Arkansas, very overrated. Virginia Tech is easily the most overrated team inside of this top 30. Tech, I love that they added them in the top 30. I think they should be ranked higher. I think Tech's going to be a top 25, top 20 team. And again, FPI, this is the here and now. Here and now. This is not entirely meant to be predictive of how good these teams will be at the end of the year, because FPI is very flawed there, and by October, especially November and then on, it's extremely, extremely accurate. I don't know what to think too much about the Big 12 schools. I think that just with how similar they all are in terms of talent, that anyone could be in the top 30 from the Big 12, but not everyone will be. I'm inclined to say that Kansas State may have the lowest floor out of everyone there, and I know they lead the odds markets in winning the Big 12. I do think, though, that Utah at least has to be close to the top 30 in FPI. Michigan at 17th and Oklahoma at 16th. So this is something I want to talk about before I move on to these teams' odds to make the playoffs and also some notable teams who missed out on the FPI top 30. Oklahoma and Michigan both have a 14.6 power rating. They're both viewed as 14.6 points superior to the average college football team. And yet, Oklahoma is predicted to win 6.9 games and lose 5.1 games. They're basically picking Oklahoma to go 7-5. And that will be with a likely win over Michigan factored in. Michigan, 14.6 power rating, 8.4 predicted wins, 3.7 predicted losses, and they're given 5 times a better shot to win their conference. Michigan's given a 6% chance to win the Big Ten. Oklahoma's given a 1.2% chance to win the SEC. This right here, and again, I know these rankings are biased toward the SEC to a certain degree. At least that's what I think. However, when I look at Oklahoma's schedule, when I look at Michigan's, it is no doubt that Michigan's is easier by a mile than Oklahoma. Michigan could lose to Oklahoma and then win every other game. There is a world where that happens. In fact, let's say you pencil in Michigan beating Ohio State. Let's just say you do that given the previous 4 years. Let's just say that. Their toughest game is Oklahoma. That is their toughest game. Outside of the Ohio State game, their toughest game is Oklahoma per FPI. Let's say they beat everyone who's worse than them on a neutral field per power ratings, and they maybe beat Ohio State by a field goal like they did last year. Oklahoma's their second toughest game. They could lose to Oklahoma, especially since it's early, and they have a young QB, and Oklahoma will probably have the best defense they play all year, and beat everyone else. Meanwhile, Oklahoma has that win over Michigan and could go 8-4 because their schedule is that hard, and they have a lot of elite great teams where they play them back to back to back. I mean, per FPI, look, they play Auburn, they play South Carolina, they play Ole Miss, they play LSU, they play Tennessee on the road. They play Tennessee, they play South Carolina on the road, they play Ole Miss at home, and they get Auburn at home, and they also get LSU at home. But still, 5 teams inside the preseason top 15. You look at anyone else they play. Oh, yeah, Alabama, this time on the road, not at home. And then Texas neutral field. They play 7 teams. 7 teams inside the preseason FPI top 15. You know how many Michigan plays inside the preseason FPI top 15? 1. It's Ohio State. And they get them at home. And they've beat them 4 games in a row, whereas Oklahoma has a 1-2 record against Texas under Venables, and they also have to play a plethora of other top 15 teams, some of whom they get before Texas. So they won't be playing at full strength as often as Michigan will, at least from what FPI is predicting. And I think anyone, even the most biased person towards the Big Ten, could probably say, yeah, Oklahoma's a tougher schedule than Michigan. These schedules have to be fixed. They have to be. It's why, personally, I am against the whole 14-team playoff. I am. I think that the 14-team playoff with no at-larges is stupid. It will kill non-conference games. Or you'll have them, but then Oklahoma versus Michigan will be whoever John Mateer's backup is versus Michigan's Jaden Davis. It'll be unwatchable, and the games won't matter. Yeah, they're going to move to the 16-team model with 3 at-larges, so that way losing a non-conference game doesn't exactly hurt you, but winning one can put you in that conversation, and also you'll get ranked higher in the final seedings because there will still be seedings. Or you move to a 16-team model that's the 5+11, and you have so many at-larges where losing one can hurt you, but at the same time, if you play in a tougher conference, or if you play in a worse conference, like regardless, winning will benefit you, especially if you're in the Big 12 or the ACC. Like, why not play the SEC or the Big 10 every year? If you beat them once and you win most of your conference games, you could get an at-large selection even if you don't win the ACC or Big 12 championship game. So the schedules have to be fixed, and they won't entirely be fixed because 8 or 9 of the team's 12 games, so 67 to 75% of every team's games will be played against members of their conference. There's not a lot of cross-conference examination. We need out-of-conference games to balance out these schedules. We do. Absolutely we do. Won't be perfect, but it will help us better examine these teams and also give more fairness to all college football teams to make sure that, let's say, Indiana last year doesn't get 11 games where they are dramatically better than their opponent. Meanwhile, Oklahoma gets 6 or 7 or even 8 games where they're not definitively better than their opponent. Just as an example. Maybe I shouldn't have added an additional rant here. I feel like I've already ranted enough about different topics in this FPI video. But I wanted to focus on that. I mean, you even look at Michigan. Michigan's predicted to win 2 more games than Florida. And Florida has a similar football power index, and Florida's quarterback is more proven. Why? Because Florida plays Miami, they play Georgia, they play Texas, they play Texas A&M, they play Tennessee. All those teams rank top 15. All of them. I mean, they play Ole Miss, LSU, against 7 of them. Michigan plays 1. They play 1 top 15 team all season. Avoid Oregon, avoid Penn State in conference. They don't play Notre Dame, who they used to play annually. They don't play anyone tough in the non-con outside of Oklahoma, who's just outside the top 15. They only play Ohio State at home, not even neutral field, like Florida versus Georgia, or such as Oklahoma versus Texas. See my point? These schedules are unbalanced, and Michigan's schedule is one of the easier ones in the Big Ten. It's still not the easiest schedule nationally. The SEC schedules, I'm a guy from Michigan, from Big Ten country, telling you this. The SEC schedules, they're probably a little bit overstated in toughness per FPI, but don't let anyone tell you on average they are not tougher than the Big Tens, ACCs, or Big 12s. They are, because they schedule at least one good non-conference game, whether it's a rival from the ACC or whether it's, Texas scheduling Ohio State, and they have 8 games where typically everyone except for Vanderbilt and maybe Mississippi State have a top 30 talent composite. I think the Big Ten is better coaching. I think the Big Ten is better culture than the SEC. I think that's objectively true, but also the SEC teams do get banged up and battered more than the Big Ten teams in the regular season, and therefore come postseason time, the Big Ten teams are healthier. I could ramble about that all day long, but I just want to get to the CFP odds before we close out this show today. So, Texas is given an 83.9% chance to reach the CFP. And when I give you these records, this will also further strike home what I'm saying about the schedules. You have Georgia given a 78.6% chance to reach the CFP. Alabama, they are given a 66.2% chance. Ohio State's given a 70.6% chance, which is a bit surprising to me because Georgia is viewed as having a much tougher schedule than Ohio State, and yet Georgia is viewed as having better odds. I guess that's just how, both get their biggest games at home, and I think FPI expects the committee to adjust for strength of schedule somewhat. I mean, they did last year. It's why Alabama was the highest ranked 3-loss team, is because of their strength of schedule, for example. The debate is just whether or not they adjusted for it enough, and whether they need to adjust for it more. Penn State's given a 63.8% chance to reach the playoffs. I think that number is way too low. Penn State's one of the only teams in football. They're the only team in football who might be immune to losing 3 games this year. Penn State's the only team in football with their schedule, returning experience, and how good they should be. They might have a 10-2 floor, and I don't think anyone else has a 10-2 floor. Everyone else can lose 3 games, and 95% of those teams that can lose 3 games can also lose 4 because they either have tough schedules or they don't have the depth to even hang with some easier schedules. So Penn State, I would put Penn State in the 70s or even 80s to reach the playoffs. Oregon at a 57.5% chance. Notre Dame at a 45.6% chance. Texas A&M at a 34.3% chance to reach the playoffs. And they are behind Miami with a 46.3% chance and Clemson with a 47.3% chance. Part of that's the fact that Clemson and Miami are the runaway favorites to win the ACC, so you have that auto bid factored in. But it's also the fact that their schedules are dramatically easier than A&M's. I mean, A&M has to play Texas and Notre Dame on the road. They have to host Florida, host South Carolina. They play LSU on the road, for example. So, again, tough schedule kind of limits a team like A&M, where if A&M is better than, Clemson or better than, let's say, Michigan, but because of their easier schedules, or even USC, for example, they get it instead of A&M, and A&M's better, I can understand the argument for saying, hey, that's not fair. Yeah, A&M is an additional loss, but Michigan and USC would have likely had an additional loss too if they played that schedule. The reason I'm sympathetic there, but not to Alabama last year, is Alabama lost to some pretty awful teams, and awful losses, I think, are just things that you can't afford. If you claim to be a really good team, you can't lose to Oklahoma and Vanderbilt in that fashion. You can't lose in hindsight to a Tennessee team who probably only won 10 games because of an easier schedule. Tennessee, by the way, 38.5% chance to reach the playoffs. That's way too high. Should be in the 20s or even teens. Without Nico, and with all they lost, and with the questions they have basically everywhere on offense except for running back, yikes. I don't think it's that high, guys. LSU with a 30.3% chance. Ole Miss with a 30.7% chance. These percentages, by the way, and you can see them on the screen, are chances to reach the CFP. Auburn with a 21.8% chance. I have no clue how their odds of reaching the playoff are 1 in every 5 simulations, given how tough their schedule is and the newness at quarterback with Jackson Arnold. I know they have talent. That's why Auburn's up here. But what about their past success, and what about their current starters tells you that this team can even go 10-2? Even if they go 9-3, I don't know if a 9-3 Auburn gets in. I mean, their schedule's tough, don't get me wrong. But what if they lose all their big games, and maybe one of them's a blowout, and they win close games? I don't know. It's just interesting to think about. South Carolina with a 20.3% chance. Oklahoma with an 18.4% chance. Michigan is a 25.3% chance. It's better than everyone around them until you get up to Ole Miss, who's a 1.5 better than them neutral field and probably has an easier schedule than Michigan, or at least a similar one. Again, Michigan's schedule, FPI sees it. It's the same thing with Ole Miss. And Ole Miss is probably a bit overvalued, in my mind, from FPI. Easier schedules help you out a ton to reach the ultimate prize, and that's why they have to be corrected. Even though Michigan's scheduled a tougher out-of-conference game, their in-conference schedule, and just with how the Big Ten is compared to the SEC, means in every 1 of 4 simulations per FPI, they make it. Meanwhile, for just in between 1 out of every 5 simulations and 1 out of every 10 simulations, so like 1 out of every 7 or 8 simulations, only Florida makes it, and they're barely below Michigan. USC is a 21% chance. SMU is a 21.1% chance. And then from here, it begins to continue to drop. Well, 22.2% chance for Kansas State. Then for Arkansas, 8.2% chance, way too high. It's a 1% chance, or 0 for Arkansas to reach the CFP. 9.2% chance for Missouri. 16.1% for Arizona State. 10.3% chance for Nebraska. 10.3%. They are 5 points worse than Florida, and yet their odds are pretty damn close to Florida's to reach the CFP. Again, SEC scheduling versus Big Ten scheduling. Virginia Tech with a 12.5% chance to reach the CFP is insane. It's 0% chance for Vatech. 8.1% chance for Washington. I don't know about that one. Could be accurate, but also intuitively I almost think it's lower. For Georgia Tech, 9.9% chance. Love it. BYU at 12.6% chance, and Kansas at 13.4%. I'm content with it. The Big 12's a conference of chaos. Before we get out of here, though, notable teams that didn't even make it in the top 30. Indiana, 31st, predicted 7.5 wins, 4.5 losses, 8.9% chance to reach the playoffs. I'm telling you right now, and I know it's a little bit of a bold take, and they don't have the recruiting that any of these schools have, minus maybe BYU, Kansas, Virginia Tech. Indiana's better than a third of these teams at minimum on this list, if not better than half. Could be better than 2/3. Indiana could be a top 10 team like they were in FPI last year, and they return more production than a lot of these teams do. And while on offense, I can understand the argument of people saying, well, it might be bogus because look how they did in their big games. The defense was not the problem in big games, and they return a lot on defense too. I think Indiana, for example, we talked a lot about Oklahoma and a lot about Michigan, with the juxtapositions of scheduling as the greatest example. Indiana, I think, will be better than both of those teams. I'm fairly confident in saying that. I don't think they'll be better than Oregon, Penn State, Ohio State, for example, or better than Georgia or Texas. But I think they'll be better than Michigan and Oklahoma. No? If so, why not? Why not? It was year one. It's not like last year was Indiana's Zenith. Maybe I'm pronouncing that wrong. Probably am. Their staff's going to be in year two, and staffs typically have the biggest impact in year two. And they have recruited at a slightly higher level under Cignetti. They've brought in talented transfers. I think it was a snub to leave Indiana off here. But I understand why. Historically, they haven't had a lot of success. Could have been a one-hit wonder. We won't know. And yeah, they're not very talented by recruiting rankings. Illinois, 44th. Their FPI rating is a 5. Indiana's was an 8.3, by the way. Illinois is predicted to go 7-5 and closer to 6-6 than 8-4. 6.8 projected wins, 5.2 projected losses. They're given a 3.8% chance to reach the playoffs. So officially, because of that, as much as everyone in the preseason has been talking about Illinois as a playoff sleeper, and many have them ranked preseason top 15, with how low they are in the odds market, I would still consider them a sleeper. It's just they're a sleeper everyone's jumping on. Colorado's at 49th with a 4.2 rating. They're projected to go 6-6 or 7-5. Florida State is 48th. They've just fallen so hard. Utah, 46th. They're projected to go 6-6, 7-5. Michigan State, 2.3 rating, so 2.3 points better than the average college football team. I don't know what to tell you. I think that Michigan State will punch above their weight class this year. Any other team that might be notable on here? Where's Purdue? Very curious to see where Purdue is before we end off this segment. Then we'll be done. Purdue, 7 points worse than the average college football team, projected to go 3-9. Wow. How the mighty have fallen. And then, speaking of a once proud program, Mike Gundy in Oklahoma State, only a third of a point better than the average college football team. They're projected to win 5.5 games, lose 6.6. So there you have it. That's ESPN's FPI. I'm College Football with Sam. My thoughts on ESPN's FPI is that they're going to be biased towards the teams that recruit the best per ESPN. So a lot of that will lean toward the SEC. Even if they used a composite, though, the SEC on average would have disproportionately more teams in FPI's preseason than any other conference because they recruit the best. They're by a mile the best recruiting conference in college football. I think as 2025 goes on, though, your average Big Ten team will improve. Your average SEC team will get worse relative to the preseason ratings. Those two will kind of balance each other out. As for the ACC and Big 12, I have absolutely no idea because I think those conferences are much worse than the Big 10 and the SEC right now. And as for the foreseeable future, that's the case, especially with the Big 12. Thank you so much for watching. Again, like, subscribe, hit the bell. I'll see you all very soon, and thank you for watching this video. Peace.